Hi and welcome to the Active Code podcast, brought to you by Aspire Active Partnerships. I'm Paul Griffiths, and joining me each week on the pod is Luke Johnson.
Aspire Active Partnerships is a community of like-minded business leaders who all believe that collaboration in the sports coaching and children's activity sector is essential for success. We've proven that working in collaboration does benefit business growth and essentially helps more children be more active more often.
To combat physical inactivity, we need organisations that are performing at their very best. Organisations will only operate to high standards if they are led well. So, if we can focus on developing high quality leaders throughout an organisation, not just at the top, customers will experience higher quality services, which means heightened enjoyment levels and increased levels of physical activity. And if we do this at an early age, we know that we can build the foundations for a more active, happier and healthier life. The Active Code investigates what it really takes to be a successful leader and how organisations can combat physical inactivity.
We won't be alone through this journey. We are joined by business owners and experts from our sector, as well as inspirational people from outside our industry. We'll understand the importance of physical activity to our guests, reflect on leadership experiences, and gain thought-provoking insights on how we can crack the Active Code and get more children more active more often. If you like what you hear, please leave us a rating and subscribe wherever you get your pods. Our guest during this episode is going to make you sit up and listen. Stuart Armstrong is a strategic sport development professional and has been involved with some of the biggest names in the industry, including the Golf Foundation, UK Coaching, the RFU as head of Player Pathways Development and Rugby Growth, and Stuart's most recent role with Sport England as head of coaching and strategic lead for workforce transformation. During the episode, Stuart shares the current challenges with physical activity initiatives, the vital role people play in engaging children and young people in physical activity, and ideas on developing the sector's workforce so we can help more and more people take up a long-term career in the sector. Enjoy the episode. Okay, Stuart, welcome to the Active Code podcast.
Hello, delighted to be with you.
It was really good to have you on. To start with, Stuart, could you give us and the listeners a bit more detail into your professional journey so far?
Well, I guess it all started, my journey in sport and physical activity, my career, all started from the day when my A-level art teacher caught me on the hockey pitch for the 14th time when I should have been in his class and said, "I think you should have a career in sport, son," which turned out to be fantastic career advice, because up to that point I was thinking about being a graphic designer or something along those lines. And from that moment on, I then switched gears and decided I was going to follow a kind of a sport path. And back then, this was in the early days of sport as a career, so you would never really thought about it. And so I then did a sport and human movement studies degree in Cardiff, which led then to a postgrad in at Cheltenham. Well, half a postgrad, still unfinished. And then I by absolute pure fluke, moved to where I live now in the middle of the country in Banbury, and a part-time job came up for as a sport development officer, temporary part-time job that when I actually got the interview became a full-time job. And I've worked in sport development pretty much ever since. So it's a happy accident, or a series of happy accidents, as most people would be. So my journey's basically started out in local authority, had a couple of sojourns into the private sector a couple of times. I worked in golf for 10 years, started out working in children's golf, working for the Golf Foundation, created what you might call the quick cricket or short tennis of golf. It's called tri-golf. And then started to work in the coaching and talent space a little bit more, working for England Golf Partnership. I then jumped ship and had a year working in a commercial entity that was trying to create the 2020 cricket of golf called Power Play Golf. That was a really exciting year. Learned an awful lot about how not to run a business. And then joined UK Coaching and worked for them as a talent lead for about 18 months before then joining the RFU as their head of player pathways and had 5 years at the RFU before taking my secondment at Sport England to be head of coaching and write the coaching plan for England. And in May, I will have been at Sport England for 6 years, which is a lot more years than I thought I would have been at Sport England for. But I am really enjoying the journey.
Is that still on secondment, or is it? I'm assuming.
Oh
That's
no, I'm permanent
full-time
now.
honour.
That would have been the
Yeah,
longest
that's a
secondment
long
in history.
secondment.
Yeah, no, I'm permanent now.
Brilliant. So yeah, you kind of career has been littered with sport and physical activity. What does physical activity mean to you personally, would you say, Stuart?
Well, I guess I was born with a condition called talipes. It's sort of colloquially known as club foot. So basically, my feet were upside down, and I had surgery to correct them. And as a result of that, I had quite a few like physical limitations. But I just played all sports. I was very fortunate to my father was a marine pilot, a Mersey pilot, and had a number of contracts abroad. So had a very outdoor life, living in West Africa and Papua New Guinea, and got exposed to a lot of physical activity and sporting life in New Guinea. There's a lot of Australians there, and we did a lot of cricket and football and Aussie rules and everything else. And so I guess my entire life has been outdoors, physically active, either playing or involved in different sporting activities. And my childhood in the UK was the same. So when I came back, I created a friendship group through playing cricket with a local team. That's like their lifelong friendships that I've built. I'm that sort of kid that would go up to the cricket nets at 9 a.m. with a box of sandwiches, and you'd see me there at 9 p.m. and I'd still be then trying to convince my younger brother to bowl at me by putting pound coins on the stumps and things like that. Likewise, when Wimbledon was on, I'd be up at the school tennis courts at 9 a.m. and they would drag me off at 9 p.m. That's who I am. If there's something to be done physically, I'm out there doing it. I did everything when I was a kid. Like, we played American football, we played basketball. I've had a go at pretty much every sport. I've had, and really obscure stuff. Ultimate frisbee. That's not even that obscure anymore. You'll see me on the beach with a spike ball net, and I had spike ball before anybody had spike ball. Everyone's got spike ball now, but I'm out there with playing spike ball and and all that sort of stuff. Or I'm the guy creating the games where we'll have a massive game of ultimate frisbee with the kids and the parents, and we'll be playing cricket. I can't sit still. If we go on holiday, my wife sits down, chills out. I'm in the pool with the kids playing around. I just can't sit still. And so, I can't even think without moving. In fact, now as we're talking, I'm fiddling with this little fidget toy. They're great, by the way. I love the fact that fidget toys exist. Can't think without moving. So physical activity has basically been my life. And I've been very, very fortunate to be able to work in physical activity. And because of my some of my physical limitations and things like that, it meant I could only go so far in terms of the talent journey. And that's why I've always been really passionate on giving access to others, so that the others can benefit from the joy it brought me.
And the environment that you've been brought up in there and you've grew up in is clearly helped shape who you are now and where you are now. And unfortunately, we're seeing less of that happening, and with current generations of younger children and families not really engaging at all. So to kind of dive right in there with, I guess, the $1 million question: how do we get more children engaged in activity? If we were to go back to those years where you were young, and myself, I can really resonate with with what you said there. Pretty much playing sport 24/7 and being dragged off pitches and courts. How can we make sure that is that gone, or can we get it back?
Well, I mean, sadly, the way society has changed and the way modern life has changed means that there's some really interesting sort of studies on this, isn't there? That the radius from the house that different generations had. So our grandparents, could have probably gone 10 miles away from the house. When I was a kid, my mum would kick me, go out and play. and then you'd be gone, wouldn't you, in the woods and this, that, and the other, and you'd come back a bit battered and bruised, but you've had the best day ever. And today's generation, or today's generation of young people, there's studies are showing have a radius that's sort of no further than about a mile. My 10-year-old daughter now, my wife is still very nervous about allowing her to walk to school on her own, even though the school is, I could pretty much hit a 7-iron to it. So it's just the nature of the way society has gone, and as a result of that, children playing out independently of adults, sadly, has become less and less prevalent. There was a great study by UK Active called Generation Inactive that actually had a startling stat, and I have no idea where it came from, but it said that a significant proportion of British children spend less time outdoors than prison inmates. So, that's quite staggering, isn't it? So we have a challenge there, where kids are being, they go from indoors in a house into a car, into another indoor setting in a school, into a car, into another indoor setting somewhere else. You can imagine how this is taking place. Now, the other challenge that we face as well is that, so to replace that free play, that child-led, no adults around, creative, conflict-ridden free play, we've replaced it with formalized experiences provided mostly by adults. So, of course, this is where my realm is. I work in workforce development, coach development, and the challenge we face is that we've now got sports experiences that don't really have very much autonomy for children involved in them at all. It's all prescribed and set out and delivered, and it's based on the notion that you've got to be there to be developing and improving. You can't be goofy, you can't mess around, you can't have a bit of chaos and self-directed learning. No, it has to be structured and ordered. And so actually, sports experiences have just become it's just like school, physical school. And and that's been in a desperate attempt to legitimize physical activity as we do physical activity, or kids are doing physical activity because it's good for them in a myriad of ways, which is fine. But actually, it's also because it's actually a fundamental right for children to be able to have self-directed play, and there is no place for them to do that sadly, these formalized spaces aren't providing that. So my view is, or one of the keys to solving the problem, in my view, is to have physical activity practitioners. We can call them coaches if you like, or we can call them instructors or teachers or leaders or activators. They're all part of what I call the coaching family. To have them understand this more, and to actually say, you know what, being hands off and actually creating a space where children can have far more ownership of their activity experience is a really good thing, and we need to see more of it, not less of it. And actually, the pressure you might feel to be super structured actually isn't really a pressure at all. In fact, you're probably ripping the soul out of the physical activity experience. So let's keep that inherent, kind of right, front and center. As you can tell, I can very quickly get on a soapbox about this, but I'll pause there.
No, absolutely, completely agreeing with you there, Stuart. I think there's so many things that have changed, and we can't just think we will reverse and rewind the clock and just get that worked 30 years ago, so let's do that again. We've got to really, previous guests on the pod, we talk a lot about listening to our audience and knowing the personas and really kind of understanding what they want and what they need. And I was just sitting there listening to you and kind of thinking back to my experiences in a structured coaching environment, but it was very much structured coaching environment, but then free play. And now with my children, there's the only free play in essence, I guess, is at home, or when their friends come round. But that's done in the garden typically, when the weather's nice, which is at the moment not particularly great. So yeah, completely get you on that. If we just go back to the kind of whole physical activity side for yourself, you talked about I think you said your daughter's school is a 7-iron away. So is in terms of how you keep active at the moment is is activity or is it structured sport more now? So what do you still do to keep active?
So lots of things, probably too many things. So I mean, I obviously do a bit of active travel, and in fact, I bear the scars of some active travel that you can probably see. It's not very good for audio, this, but I actually came off my push-along scooter that I used to go from Marylebone Station to the office. So I'm doing a bit of active travel, but I was doing active travel in the dark on the way home after had been for some after work drinks with some colleagues, and managed to come off my scooter and do a full face plant, which was
Right.
fun. Um, but active travel is something that I do quite a bit, whether it's walking or scooting or whatever. Um, but if I'm totally honest, that's a means to an end. That's an attempt to sort of maintain sort of some physical activity in an otherwise relatively sedentary day. Um, but I'm that sort of person who will run all day if there's something to chase. Uh, I'm not very good at exercise for exercise's sake. I'm not the sort of person who'll go for a lunchtime run. That's not how I'm made. So I play quite a bit of tennis when I get time. I play as much golf as I can. Again, when I get time, got two well. I want to say young kids, but my son's 14 and my daughter's 10. I actually have come back to playing hockey. Because my son is playing hockey he's old enough to play men's hockey now, so we've actually played together, which was interesting because in our first game together he scored a goal and I got sin binned, which was hilarious for him, and especially when it came to the votes at the end of the week for the doofus of the day. I think was the award I got. Um, so yeah, so I play with him, and that's been really enjoyable, actually, really enjoyable. And he's making rapid progress so far to the point where he's probably getting into the teams that I'm not going to get selected for anymore, and therefore I'm probably able to go back to sort of semi-retirement. I coach a lot, doing at least 2 or 3 nights a week, probably too much of that, and that keeps me relatively. I have to keep on my toes as far as that's concerned. And I'm relatively active. I don't necessarily get involved with playing that much, but I'm still kind of actively engaged in providing those experiences. And then there's just lots of other sort of infrequent sporting activities that I'll get involved with. I coach cricket as well, so I'll probably get involved with playing this year because again my son's involved back in playing, so I'll be there with him anyway. So I may as well. And there's a lot.
As I say, so and then the rest of the time you try and fit your work in.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and do the odd podcast here and there and
Yeah.
stuff like that. Yeah.
And from an activity perspective, are we talking benefits wise? Is it social, mental, physical? The benefits, is it a combination of everything?
All of the above, I'd say. Some days I don't. I mean, I'm sort of getting close to 50 now, so some days I don't feel like the benefits are physical. Like the next day, particularly, when I have to walk down the stairs sideways. But that's partly to do with the fact that I've played able-bodied sport all my life on limbs that were repaired when I was a child, and therefore, eventually you sort of pay the price for that. And also when I was younger, I was involved in representative activity, and like a lot of kids, particularly when I was at university, I was probably playing or training every single day. Of course, that catches up with you eventually. But yeah, I mean, it's the social side of connecting with people, which is important for well-being and mental health. When I'm coaching, there's times when I've had a busy day and I just can't really get my head around going out. But once I've come back, I'm like, I feel re-energized and like I've had a really good good time. And playing as well, particularly watching, helping young people develop and seeing them progress. And some of them are now coming into kind of the senior ranks and things like that, going on to representative stuff. It gives me a great sense of having contributed to their individual development. So I like to think that what I give comes back to me one way or another, in that sort of sense of purpose that it brings and it gives me.
Stuart, you mentioned earlier that it's important for you to give access to to all young people to sport and to physical activity. How do you go about promoting physical activity, especially to those that aren't really engaged in sport or who have had like a negative experience in the past in sport?
Well, I wouldn't. I'm not going to go as far as to say that I've got any hard and fast solutions here, because as you probably know, that this is a kind of exquisitely complex problem. It's a wicked problem, because what might, I think historically the way sport development used to work, and I did this too. It was program driven, usually top down. So someone would say, oh look, we need to deliver this program to reach these people, and what people recognise is that doesn't really work, or it doesn't work as well as it should do for the investment that goes into it. So what we recognise in terms of the work I do at Sport England, I'm fortunate to understand a lot of this, is that it's quite a complex challenge, because we're dealing with human beings who've got complex needs, and what might help in one place doesn't in another place, and likewise, what might work for one person doesn't necessarily work for another. So to have something that's adaptable and flexible is a really key element. Now, my view is that for too long we've looked past the people who provide the experiences. So I kind of look at sport and physical activity similar to how maybe, say, an organization like Disney approaches an experience. The recognition that when somebody engages in an experience, whether it's a leisure experience or an entertainment experience, that how they experience that determines then whether they're going to be involved in the future. So I think for too long sports policy making has been based on trying to reach people kind of just and purely in terms of volume numbers. And the recognition, I think, now, and this has sort of been borne out, is that actually no, we need to have a much more qualitative approach to the way we do that. And actually part of that is those people who provide experiences and them being really well equipped and supported to do that, and not kind of looking past them. I describe those people as being, actually, a colleague of mine, or an ex-colleague of mine, Lucy Moore, described them as hidden in plain sight. And actually, it's not just about quick training and make sure that they're compliant to safeguarding and off you go, everything's good and it'll all work, and one physical activity experience is as good as any other. Actually, no, we need to go beyond that and provide more. So I believe that people providing activity for people is a big part of the future of opening doors and access. But that's also quite challenging and costly. So we have to be able to have solutions that work at scale without necessarily always thinking about people. And one of the things I think that's helped this is helping organizations who are keen to engage to understand that, it's not about your sport. This is not about injecting sport into people. Or forcing sport onto people, or even trying to inject sport into a place, a sport into a place. It's about understanding the role that a sport or sport itself or physical activity itself can play in the lives of people in communities. And that will be different from place to place, from neighborhood to neighborhood. And it makes it challenging for, kind of a system builder, if you like, to be able to do that sort of thing. But just to turn the telescope around a little bit and to actually say, let's stop thinking with our sporting lens on and start thinking about the needs of a community in place, and then start to design things around them that will make sense and be useful to help them with their daily lives. That's a very, very significant shift. And we're only at the start of that, I would say. But I think there's some real exciting possibilities as far as that's concerned.
Stuart, would you say if you look at competition in sport now, in junior sport, youth sport now, compared to, say, I don't know, 20 years ago, 25 years ago, would you say that is potentially one of the barriers that has either stopped children taking part in sporting activities, or is having an impact on dropout at young ages? Because if I ask this because you look back over that kind of 20, 25 year period, From my memory and experience, there wasn't much structured activity, coaching activity going on until you were probably under 12, under 13. And then typically that's when kind of competition started, recreational. And then you had your elite academies in certain sports that typically started around, I don't know, 16. Whereas nowadays, you hear of football scouts picking kids up at 5, and almost going down a competitive route and pathway. You've got clubs that are competing with each other regionally at a very young age in more traditional sports, I'd say. So would it be right to say that competition in sport at a junior age is probably has caused a barrier and is maybe having an effect on participation?
It might surprise you to hear me say this, but I would say no. I don't think competition is the problem itself. I think the problem is what competition has become and what competition does to adult human beings who should know better. So if you think of competition, and even if you go back to the unstructured, I talked about, playing with my friends on a park, whether it was cricket or football or American football or whatever. Those are some of the most competitive engagements you could possibly imagine. 25 all.
Yeah.
That's competitive. That's really competitive. The teams are really equally matched. It's an absolute ding dong. One team goes 2 goals ahead, and then we come back, and you don't want it to end. You never want it to end. You literally you're on your knees, but you don't want it to end. They're the great ones, aren't they? They're the ones we all remember. And then even in a more formal, structured league type or whatever it might be sort of experience, it's those games that are the ones that matter. When you've been on the receiving end of a 15-0 drubbing, that's no fun. If you've inflicted a 15-0 drubbing on someone else, that's no fun. That's not competitive.
Yeah.
Competition, if you go back to its truest definition, goes right back to the ancient Greeks, goes back to the Olympic ideals, which was born from military training, is the notion of coming together, 2 parties coming together to make themselves better. Competere, I think it is. I probably butchered that, but and so actually, if you get back to the true essence of competition itself, 2 parties coming together to get better, they have to be equally matched to get better. And actually, if you find you're on, one side is more dominant than the other, it's not competitive then. That's anti-competitive. But the problem is the word competition has become synonymous with the outcome of the competition. So winning, right, and winning by a margin has become associated with competition, and therefore gives competition a bad name. So people think we need to get rid of competition. No, we just need to get rid of that form of competition, which isn't actually competition. And we need to address the fact that adults think that's good. Adults think that putting on social media, we beat the local club 89-6 in rugby, is good. It's not good. Actually, it advertises something really quite malignant within sporting culture.
And so is that we say that's parents and coaches?
It's everyone. Yeah, it's so I deliberately use the word adults so that so as not to kind of classify. But yeah, I mean, all of the adults involved in youth sport, whether it's parents or coaches or administrators or volunteers or whatever it is, we've all become seduced by this notion that kind of positive and successful sporting experiences are linked to an artificial construct which let's call a league table. And good coaches have teams that are at the top of those league tables if you're in a team sport. Good coaches have players who are achieving cups and medals in individual sports and whatever it is. I'm not saying performance isn't important. What I'm trying to say is that we are trying to reframe the experience through the lens of the child who, let's face it, Okay, they might be a little bit unhappy that they didn't. When you ask kids, actually, and I've had children like this, because my son's football team has been, quite. They've had some like challenges. It's a very inclusive club. They'll take any child really, regardless of physical capabilities, and as a result of that, and they'll play equal game time. And as a result of that, they play against teams that don't do that, and they obviously come off on the receiving end. So it's difficult. But I've heard them in the car when I've been kind of driving them to and from places, and they get annoyed not because they lost, but because they didn't play to their potential. They weren't able to compete.
Yeah.
And so that's the interesting thing about all of this. So anyway, so just to circle around on this, lots of things have happened. And don't even get me started on the fact that 5-year-olds are being recruited into sort of the professional talent pathways in some sports. In my mind, that's just actually criminal. And there's things that should be done to address all of that, and things will happen before very long. But that notion of that's just capitalism gone bonkers, and the commodification of children in that context. They're basically seen as a means by which to, if I get this kid at 5, I might be able to sell him at 14 for 250 grand or whatever it is. That's just like the world gone absolutely crazy, and that is something that needs to be addressed in itself. But that's not really linked to competition. That's linked to a warped notion of like how human beings should be treated in the world. What I'm talking about here is in community sport context. You've almost got this premature, what Debbie Sayers from Salisbury Rovers talks about. She calls it premature professionalism. And what we want is more of a sporting environmentalism, something sustainable. So we want to try and move towards like a sustainable model that doesn't necessarily just burn through resources in the form of children, and kind of break them on the basis that we might have a few survivors that then legitimize the experiences. What we want is something that's very nourishing and very holistic that also drives improvement. And I think the two things are absolutely synonymous, by the way. A better, more holistic, more sustainable, child-centered experience actually drives better performances, and children stay in sport for much, much longer, and they're retained. These other notions of driving to performance really early just bring burnout, just really quickly see loads of dropout.
Yeah.
Because children are just marginalized really quickly and just seen as a means to an end. And that only lasts for so long.
Yeah, I think we also see that kind of one sport focus mind, don't we, as well? It's like, well, I enjoy a particular sport, or my parent tells me I enjoy a particular sport, and I will only do this sport. The whole kind of seasonal element seems to have gone out the window some of the time, and it's kind of that one's focus on a sport, and they get to 14, 15, had enough burnout, not interested, and then all of a sudden it's like, well, actually, I don't have the confidence to do another sport because I've never done it before. I've never tried it. Have I got the skills? Have I got the confidence to do it? No, I haven't. So do you know what? I'm not going to do it. And then we see them disappear. So can we focus on like the workforce development side of things and look at that? You talked about the kind of communities and whether it's coaches, activators, whatever we call them. Let's call them coaches for the sake of this conversation. So with coaches and looking back at those younger people, children who don't engage in sport, if we look at the representation of the coaching workforce in communities who are not active, less active, how do we ensure that we have the right coaches who the children can relate to, who the children are confident that their coach understands them, and they understand the community that they're brought up in? Does that make sense? Or have I completely waffled on a bit there?
No. And actually, what you've just touched on is probably one of the central features of uniting the movement, Sport England strategy, and certainly the element relating to people, coaching, leadership, workforce, is this central notion of, if we genuinely want to tackle inequality, which is the term that we use, and if we genuinely want to increase access, break down barriers, we need to be able to have a workforce that is from within that community. So there are great coaches, probably. Well, I say probably. I know there are great coaches working in and around these communities. And when I say they're great coaches, they don't know that they're great coaches yet, but they are. And they might not have had any formal education or training. They might not, be on anyone's spreadsheet or in anybody's database, but they're there and they're doing it. And they might not even be in a formal sporting context. It might be in a community setting or a youth centre or somewhere like that. And they are brilliant. Why? Because they understand the kids, or they understand the people who they're working with. And part of the reason why they understand them is because they've grown up around them. They know them. They know the place, they know the challenges, they know the area, they know the issues, they know the families, they know the neighbourhoods, all of those sorts of things. It makes me think about, I was on Radio 5 Live a long time ago, and I was on a phone in, and on the phone in was a boxing coach from Moss Side in Manchester, Nigel Travers, and he works at Moss Side Firebox. Fantastic. And he basically called me out on this phone-in show and said, "You don't know what you're talking about," and he was right. So I went to see him, and I walked into his boxing gym, and there he was with these kids, and he's energy, and there's lots of noise and all that sort of stuff. But afterwards we went into his porter cabin, which is outside, and sat there and had a cup of coffee, and we were talking for 2 hours. And believe it or not, I didn't say a word because he wanted to tell me his story, which was brilliant. And one of the things that said to me, really struck with me was, he's got kids there in that gym, not just kids, adults as well, but kids particularly. Well, in fact, he's got coaches who are ex-offenders, who are starting out on their journey, who want to make a difference to their lives, and one of the ways they want to do that is to actually kind of make a difference to other kids. And they've got kids in there who would otherwise be on the streets killing each other because they're either from a different neighborhood or they're from different ethnic group. And they're all in that gym, and none of them would ever dream of creating any trouble either inside the gym or outside of the gym, because he said to them, "You create trouble outside the gym, you don't come back in." And it's like that's the difference. That's you see, that is somebody who isn't just there for the sport. He understands actually that what the sport can do for so many other aspects of society, and he understands it inside out. No one needs to teach him that. And in my opinion, I even look at my own education and upbringing. I've had far too much of my time in sport just thinking about the sport itself. My job was to inject sport into people, whereas he recognizes his job is for sport to be used as a vehicle to solve other things. Now, it also happens that a lot of these kids go on to be really, really quite good. So I'm telling you this story because it's an example of what needs to change in workforce development. Nigel Travers is not going to go on a course. But what Nigel Travers wants is someone to go into his gym and go, "You're absolutely brilliant. Let me give you some form of accreditation that might help you then to either get more funding or get more recognition or whatever it is." And there's people like that everywhere who don't get recognized. Why? Because the rest of the sporting system asked them to go on a course or asked them to go and do some sort of thing that makes no difference or relevance to them, because they're doing the job already and it's having an impact. So there is the kind of workforce development system itself is exclusionary. It marginalizes, and we need to break it in order to rebuild it to a certain extent. It's not totally broken, but it needs a bit of breaking in order to be able to include those sorts of people. And I could give you I could tell you story after story after story of these fantastic people that you meet. And for me, that's the future of workforce development.
And the work you do at Sport English, do you get those people involved in discussions at the kind of around the table at the top from a strategic perspective, and get buy-in from them to try and help them integrate other people from their backgrounds and understand that workforce development route?
More than we ever have before. And I wouldn't say it's perfect, but one of the big aspirations of this strategy, Uniting the Movement, is to to build a movement. That's one of the things we aim to do, which is why it's called Uniting a Movement. So instead of, in the past, Sport England, we know stuff and we've got money and we'll invest in you to do this, and making it quite transactional. It's actually much just less about investment and money. It's much more about connecting and convening and bringing people together and collective action. And our work more and more is about actually just bringing people together and actually strengthening them by actually, instead of them working separately in silos, trying to achieve their own aspirations, coming together and working together to make their what they do better. And we're doing much more of that kind of work. So that's done on an organizational level, but bringing the people from right at the coalface into that conversation is a big part of the way we intend to work in the future. We're already doing that with a lot of the work we're doing in workforce development, where we've got a combination of grassroots activists, almost agitators, in a room with leaders and system builders in organizations, and then we just sort of watch the sparks fly, and sometimes some magic emerges, and then you can move forward like that.
Stuart, we talked about, or you've talked about, the kind of clubs and the professional pathways into professional sport. Just on the workforce side of things, but in schools, where do you sit on the debate of sports coaches working in schools? Should they be doing that? Should they, or should it just be teachers delivering PE in schools? Where do you sit with that?
Well, I guess all I care about is that there's somebody who can provide a really brilliant experience for children in an environment where, so in school there's to a certain extent, there's a bit of a captive audience element to that. And I would say that that it's an opportunity perhaps to provide access to physical activity forms that children would otherwise never really get the access to. And so therefore there's a real positivity to doing that. And I would like to see the diet of physical activity provision really, really widened and broadened. It's very narrow at the moment, and it's very narrow to traditional activities, largely because the sporting organisations have got the most resources, have the ability to get to the schools. So I'm not opposed to the idea of the sport and physical activity specialists, our workforce, complementing an educational provision. And I think the two can be really powerful, because what the educators have expertise that the sports practitioner doesn't have. But likewise, the sports practitioner has expertise sometimes that the educator doesn't have, by virtue of the fact that the educator is more of a generalist. So it's a potentially, in the best cases, a really, really positive thing if it can be done well. The problem is it's very, very difficult to identify who does it well. And particularly if you're in a school, what measures do you currently have to identify somebody who is good? A level 2 certificate that they got 10 years ago? Does that define their ability to work in a school setting alongside educational practitioners? Not really. Does it say anything about their outlook, their philosophy, their behaviors, their drivers? No, not really. So actually, we need a much more sophisticated and better way of identifying people. To me, it is still absolutely ridiculous that you or I now could literally get our phone out and find somebody to come and do the plastering in my bathroom, but I could never find someone to come and I could never do the same and find someone to come and do a trampolining class. And that's ridiculous in this day and age. So in my view, one of the things we need to do to answer this question is I'm basically agnostic about it, if I'm totally honest. But what I am passionate about is the best possible people providing the best possible experience. And if you've got a really passionate and trained teacher, they're brilliant, but they're not everywhere. So in some cases, we need additional provision to top that up. Now, in an ideal utopian world, what would you have? You'd probably have, I'd have in primary schools particularly, PE specialists who were brilliantly trained, who had absolutely fantastic understanding of all these different sports activities, who could provide the best possible experience. Is it even feasible for that to happen? I'm not sure. So actually, this hybrid model is probably the best way forward, but I don't think it works particularly well because of the other systemic problems that exist around identification and everything else. Yeah, sorry, that was a long-winded answer.
No, completely made sense. What we do on the pod is look at kind of the leadership side of things as well, and how leaders and organisations can ultimately combat physical inactivity. And you've mentioned a couple of leaders already. One was it Michael in the boxing club in Manchester. Who would you say the most inspirational leader you've worked with?
Well, this will sound awful, but in my career, I've obviously had interactions with lots and lots of different leaders, and the most inspirational ones, there aren't as many as there should be in my career journey. So that's an issue in itself. How sport can have more, kind of inspirational leaders working within it. I should say actually that, my current chief executive, Tim Hollingsworth, and I'm not just saying this because I work for him.
Doesn't sound like that at all, Stuart.
Genuinely, I'm not, right? Because one of the things Tim will probably know is that I'm very honest when it comes to things like this. But actually, a big reason why, I said right at the start of the show that, I'm surprised that I'm still at Sport England. A big reason why I am is because of the vision he came with and the way he goes about engaging with not only our organization but the wider network, the wider organization, and the kind of the drive that he brings to that particular mission. And it's not without its challenges, and I'm not saying everything's perfect and no leader is, but he, I would have to say that, as leaders go, he is one that, I have a great deal of admiration for, and I do think the way that, the organisation is changing and has changed is there's an awful lot that he should take great credit for. But actually, many of the leaders I think that really, I guess, excite me are through some of the partners that I work with. And there is a kind of emerging generation of leaders who, how do I describe it? There's quite a lot of people who work in sport and physical activity, and I think part of the reason they work in sport and physical activity is because they're obviously passionate about the sport, and they're passionate about, kind of helping other people to access sport. But and I'll probably put myself in that bracket. That's certainly where I was in my mindset. But there's a new generation of leaders that I'm meeting who, yes, they're passionate about sport and all those sorts of things, but actually what they're more passionate about is the impact that they can have to change and hopefully make a positive impact on people's lives. And in fact, I put something on LinkedIn this morning, I think, or yesterday. Gary Laybourne at Coach Corps. He's been a chief exec for probably a couple of years now, and came right from the worked at Greenhouse and was one of the coaches there, and very much rooted in the grassroots at the coalface, and has progressed and become a chief executive of a charity and a growing charity, and doing fantastic work in coaching, helping young people who've sort of fallen out of the education system or have not been served well by the education system, and giving them a career, giving them a new career as a community activator coach, and that is transformative. And some of those young people, when I get the privilege of meeting them, it's fantastic. And he almost feels that kind of every single individual's life chances. He feels that personally, and those kinds of people are enormously inspiring to work alongside. And then, along similar lines, someone like Bourne Barricore, who you may have met before, who, started out as a personal trainer and, slowly but surely, London borough by London borough, has taken a concept where let's provide some free outdoor exercise classes in a park to something that was pretty small and pretty niche, isn't it? Something that's now like, London wide and becoming rapidly nationwide, and the drive and the commitment. And, I say this a lot, I meet these people. I'm fortunate enough to work alongside them and meet them regularly. And I just come away feeling like enormously inadequate because they're just so inspiring and so kind of driven by what they do. And then likewise, there's an emerging, I guess, sort of, what's the word I'm looking for? An emerging generation of female leaders, coming into the sports world. Not necessarily at the top, sometimes in the, in lower ranks, but I'm very fortunate also to work alongside someone like Tara Dillon at Simspa. And, that's again, somebody who started out as a lifeguard and then became a duty manager and then started to work, managing a leisure centre and then managed a load of leisure centres and then went on to do a load of other things, and, I have a sort of weekly dialogue with Tara and, she feels it, she feels people's challenges, particularly in the pandemic. She could feel people's pain. It was quite traumatic, I think, for her. And it's this sort of generation of individual who's really kind of driving change. And there's a lot of, look, I've named 3, and there's so many more that I could name, and I feel really bad that I haven't named them, because I could go on and on and on. But there's a lot of really brave, intrepid, change driving leaders coming into the sport and physical activity sector, and it's quite an exciting place to be.
Yeah, it really is. You mentioned some names that have been on the pod previously and upcoming guests as well. So yeah, some good people there for sure. What do you think? I know you've been in the sector itself for some years now, but what do you think we can learn from other sectors to help combat physical inactivity?
Well, obviously, I'm unapologetically going to bang the workforce drum again. But if you take the health sector and you look at the way, say, the health service invests in its people, or at least tries to, and is committed to, investing in its people, I think there's a lot that, we can take from a sector like health. Likewise, there are a number of other sectors who've actually been able to really get their act together in terms of like professionalizing, and as a result of that have really been able to, almost become masters of their own destiny in terms of directing skills funding or, channeling investment into particular aspects of training that are really needed within the sector, transforming the way new young people enter the sector from things like further education or higher education. And there's been a number of different sectors like, particularly automotive and stuff like that have really done that well. And that's something that I think we could really learn from and we could benefit from. And so I guess there are a couple that really jump out, because we're a little bit behind as an organisation, as a sector, as far as that's concerned. We have an awful lot of people who are very professional. We just don't have the mechanism to recognise that, that's coherent across the sector. And if we could get that, I think that would do us an awful lot of good.
No, absolutely. Stuart, we like to give listeners a few quick wins or quick takeaways in each episode. So if listeners wanted to enhance their knowledge or leadership skills in their business, do you have any books, podcasts, or people you would recommend?
Yeah, I've got a couple right here. There's a couple of really good books actually that I would recommend. One that I've found through our journey is this book called Reinventing Organizations by Frederick Laloux. That actually talks about, like, uses actual case studies of different organizations that have reinvented themselves and to become a kind of a different kind of place to work. Sometimes I read it and think, oh God, we've got so far to go. But then I also think, oh, at least we're on the journey. So there's a good thing there. That would be a big recommendation from my perspective. My podcast taste keeps changing all the time. And so, I'm listening to a lot of different things, on a weekly basis. One of the podcasts that I really like, though, because it's exploring sort of lots of different angles, if you like, on human development or human experience, is called Against the Rules, and it's by a pretty well-known author, a guy called Michael Lewis, who wrote Moneyball and The Big Short and a number of others. He's one of my favorite authors. And his first series of podcasts came out, they were all about coaching, so obviously got me hooked on that. But now he's moving on to other things, and like the latest one, for example, was like where do you find expertise? And it's not where you think it is. It's not at the top, because actually the people at the top really don't know what's going on. It's actually 6 layers down at the people right at the coalface. And so that for me has been really fascinating, and that's one of my favourites at the moment, probably a bit of an unheard of one. So that's just a couple of book recommendations. I also would recommend there's so many. Look at that, I've got like a pile of books on here. But this particular book's been really interesting, which is called Becoming a True Athlete by Lawrence Halstead. He was on my podcast recently. Oh, a plug for that, by the way. Obviously, I do a podcast, The Talent Equation, full of fascinating stuff, all about coaching and skill acquisition and providing better experiences for children. But The True Athlete is a book. He's been on that as well, and it's really fascinating kind of reframing of what a sporting experience could be, using a different set of values and principles than what we would commonly think of when we talk about the value of sport. So that's another one I think would be really interesting for people to read.
And one that I know that you won't plug yourself, but your own podcast that you've just mentioned there, the Talent Equation, is a really popular pod. So for those people that haven't listened to that yet, highly recommend that, and some brilliant insights from all sorts of people, including Stuart himself, of course, and some of the brilliant guests that you get in there. So highly recommend to those people listening to this that you jump across that. Of course, don't start listening to the Talent Equation instead of the Active Code. Listen to both at the same time.
Yeah, they're not it'd be a nice parallel listen, I would say.
Yeah, there you go. We've probably touched on this already, but we always finished our pod with the same question, and that is, what one thing can our sector do in order to crack the Active Code and get more children more active more often?
Well, I bet most people say this. It's not one thing.
Yeah, but that's what we say, one thing.
Okay.
Well, the most important thing, kind of reframe it a little bit.
Well, I guess for me, I'd probably put it this way. People are really important. Sport and physical activity is a people business. A strategy is just a piece of paper until somebody reads it and takes action. Plan is just a plan, same thing. So people are really important. And so genuinely having a proper think about how much we value the people who are part of sport and physical activity, and how we can attract and retain more people into our sector who would not otherwise think of it as a genuine career option, whether it's at the front line or it's in policy making or it's in development roles or whatever it is. If we could properly think about people, I think we could transform sport and physical activity provision. And a big part of that is bringing in people who, are not like, if you look at most rooms I'm in at the moment, sadly, they're all a bit like me, male, pale, and stale. So we do need to change that face. So once we see different people actively involved in the provision, one way or another, we will have probably made such a significant difference that actually we'll begin to really make things happen. And so, an investment in people, a proper investment in people, would be my one thing.
Brilliant. I think going back on your last point now, that kind of touches on what we spoke about earlier, and really getting that representation across all communities. And that's I completely agree with that, Stuart. Right, thank you so much for your time today. I think we said at the start off before we started the recording that this is in danger of going on for over an hour, and we always try to keep it under an hour. And I think we've just about kind of gone over. However, it's been great. I think there's certainly another episode at some point in the future from you, Stuart. It'd be great to get you back on and delve even deeper into that workforce development and see how things are progressing on that front. So just want to again say thank you for your time. Really appreciate it. If people want to get in touch with you, where's the best place to find yourself? Apart from on the hockey field, cricket pitch, beach.
Yeah, that's probably court. There's the challenge, isn't it? If they wanted to get hold of me I'm on Twitter at Stu_Arm. I'm also on LinkedIn. Search me up on LinkedIn. They're the two best channels. And if they want to get hold of me via on the talent equation side of things, then talentequation.co.uk. And there's ways of getting in touch with me through that platform.
Great stuff. Thanks for your time, Stuart. Take care.
Thanks a lot.
Join us next time for the Active Code podcast. Remember to subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss an episode. You can connect with us on Twitter at aspire_partners and find out more about us and the network at www.aspireactivepartnerships.co.uk.